Everyone in the quiet town of Somerset believed little Sophie wouldn't live past her 9th birthday. Doctors had given up, specialists had failed, and her single father was ready to give everything he had, even work 3 jobs, if it could give his daughter one more breath of life. But no one, not even him, imagined that the fragile girl's miracle would come from a woman who arrived at their door with torn shoes, trembling hands, and a secret she carried in her heart. If this story touched your heart, show your love, like, share, and comment your thoughts, and subscribe to Enlightened Story for more heartfelt tales like this one. The Carter house stood modestly at the edge of town, small but full of memories, its walls echoing with silence and sorrow. Inside, Sophie Carter, 8 years old, pale, fragile, her golden hair fading into lifeless strands, lay on a bed surrounded by medical equipment her father had scraped together every last penny to afford. Her father, Daniel Carter, sat beside her every night, staring helplessly at the child he loved more than his own life. Daniel was a man who had nothing but grit, love, and 2 jobs that barely covered the bills. He had lost his wife, Clara, during childbirth. Since then, Sophie had been the center of his world and his deepest pain. She was born with a rare heart condition that no doctor could cure. Every breath she took seemed borrowed from time itself. Daniel had taken loans, sold his car, picked up night shifts at the factory, all just to afford whatever treatment he could. But Sophie's condition only worsened. She could barely walk across her room without gasping for air. When her last caregiver quit, unable to keep up with the long hours for little pay, Daniel placed a simple ad for a nanny, not expecting much. He could only offer a small wage. But one rainy afternoon, a woman arrived. Her name was Grace Bennett. She was young, maybe in her late 20s, with quiet eyes that carried both kindness and sorrow. Her dress was plain, her coat worn at the edges, and her shoes soaked through. She looked nothing like the professionals who had come before her. Daniel frowned gently. "You don't look very experienced." Grace smiled faintly. "Experience is not always written on paper, sir. Sometimes it's written in the heart." Those words struck something in Daniel. There was something about her, a calmness that seemed rare. Against his own uncertainty, he hired her. If she doesn't work out, he told himself, at least Sophie will have one more person who truly cares. From the first day, Sophie resisted Grace. The little girl barely spoke, often turning her face to the wall. "You'll leave too," she whispered one night. "Everyone leaves when I get worse." But Grace didn't leave. She sat beside Sophie's bed for hours, reading stories softly, singing lullabies she remembered from her own childhood. When Sophie couldn't sleep, Grace would hold her hand and hum until dawn. She brought sunlight into the room, not through wealth or medicine, but through patience and love. Days turned into weeks, and something began to change. Sophie started smiling again. She laughed at Grace's silly jokes and insisted that Grace join her tea parties with stuffed animals. Even her doctor noticed improvement. Her oxygen levels were steadier, her color brighter. Daniel couldn't explain it. "What are you doing differently?" he asked one evening, watching Grace braid Sophie's hair by the window. Grace looked at him, her expression gentle but firm. "Sometimes the heart doesn't just need medicine, Mr. Carter. It needs to feel safe, loved, and alive." Maybe Sophie just needed someone to remind her how to live again. He didn't know how to respond, but her words lingered in his heart. For the first time in years, he heard his daughter's laughter echo through the halls. However, not everyone was pleased. A few neighbors whispered that Grace was too close to the girl, that she was using emotion to win favor. A few even accused her of exaggerating Sophie's improvement to keep her job. Daniel ignored the gossip, but doubts began to stir when he noticed Grace sometimes sneaking out late at night. One stormy night, he followed her. She walked down the road to a small, broken-down apartment near the edge of town. Through the cracked window, he saw her sitting by a flickering candle, counting coins from a jar, barely enough for food. Then he saw something that froze him, a small photograph on her table of a little boy. The child looked pale, weak, his hair patchy from treatment. The next morning, he confronted her. "Who is that boy?" he asked. Grace hesitated, her eyes filled with tears. "My son," she whispered. "His name was Noah. He died 2 years ago from the same condition Sophie has." Daniel's chest tightened. "The same condition?" She nodded. "I couldn't afford the treatments. I watched him fade away in my arms. I promised myself that if I ever met another child like him, I would do whatever it took to help them live the life he never could." Her voice broke. "I can't bring Noah back, sir, but maybe I can help save your daughter." Daniel turned away, ashamed of the suspicion he'd felt. For the first time, he saw her not as an employee, but as a mother who had already lost everything. Weeks passed, and Sophie continued to improve beyond all medical expectation. She could walk again, run short distances, even dance in the yard with Grace. The doctors called it unexplainable progress, but Daniel knew what it was, the power of compassion. However, the peace didn't last. One evening, Sophie Sophie collapsed suddenly while playing in the yard. Her heartbeat dropped. Her breathing turned shallow. Panic filled the house. Daniel rushed her to the hospital, where doctors said her condition had worsened overnight. Her heart was failing. Grace refused to leave Sophie's side. She held the child's hand and prayed silently. Daniel sat outside the room, feeling powerless once again. Hours later, Grace came out, tears streaming down her face. "There's one last thing we can try," she said shakily. "A heart procedure, experimental. But they need a donor for the plasma match, and I'm compatible." Daniel's eyes widened. "That could be dangerous for you." "I know," she said softly, "but I lost one child already. I won't lose another." Despite the doctor's warnings, Grace insisted. The procedure was long and risky. Daniel paced outside for hours, each minute feeling like eternity. When the doors finally opened, the doctor smiled faintly. "Sophie is stable. The treatment worked miraculously." But when Daniel looked past him, he saw Grace lying unconscious on a nearby stretcher, pale as snow. She had given more than just her blood. She had given her strength, her life's last hope. For 3 days, she remained in a coma. Daniel visited her daily, holding her hand and whispering, "You saved my daughter. Please come back." On the 4th day, her eyes fluttered open. The first thing she asked was, "How's Sophie?" Daniel smiled through tears. "She's waiting to see you." The reunion was something no one forgot. Sophie ran into Grace's arms, sobbing, "You came back. I knew you wouldn't leave me." Even the neighbors who once doubted Grace cried silently. Months later, Sophie was declared healthy enough to live a normal life. Daniel, with help from the community and a fundraiser the whole town rallied behind, opened a small support center in Noah's name, the Noah Heart Fund, dedicated to helping families who couldn't afford treatment for children with rare heart conditions. During the opening, Daniel stood before the small crowd, his voice thick with emotion. "I once thought I had nothing to offer," he said, looking at Grace and Sophie standing together. "But I learned that true miracles don't come from money. They come from hearts that give, even when they have nothing left to give." He turned toward Grace, his voice trembling. "You didn't just save my daughter, Grace. You saved me from losing faith in love, in kindness, in life itself." The small crowd applauded, but Grace simply smiled. "I didn't do the impossible, Mr. Carter," she whispered. "I just loved her enough to make her believe she could live." As the evening sun set behind the little center, Sophie ran through the yard, her laughter echoing once again, full of life, full of hope. And Grace watched her, tears in her eyes, feeling her son's spirit in the wind. For in saving one child, she had finally healed the broken part of her own heart. True miracles don't come from wealth or science alone. They come from love, sacrifice, and the courage to give when you have nothing left. Because sometimes the most powerful medicine in the world is a kind heart. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Enlighten Story for more stories like this one.